What's up guys, it's me, Shaman. We're back at it again with another Fire Force banger. And in today's video, I want to do something a little fun. You know, it might sound a little cringe on paper because, you know, we might be talking about potential chips, but we're gonna do it regardless. Who are the ancestors and descendants between Fire Force and Soul Eater? Basically, who had whose kids? And is Soul actually related to Shinra? We're gonna have some fun and take the characters of Soul Eater and see who they're connected with in terms of their family tree and who exactly are they descendants of. So I think the first one to start with would be obvious. Shinra created Shinigami and Kid is Shinigami's son. So basically that would mean that Kid is a direct descendant of Shinra when you take into consideration that he made Shinigami. And it's also really funny when you think about it because Death also made Kid in the image of Shinra. And with Kid looking like Shinra, it's almost as if Shinra's naturally an ancient ancestor of Kid's. Now that we've gotten Kid and Shinigami out of the way, what about the #1 Meister at DWMA? Who is Stein's ancestor? And honestly, it's a little obvious when we really think about it. His ancestor would most likely be Hinawa, because their resemblances are actually very striking. They almost look exactly the same and they both wear glasses. And when we really think about it, it's a no-brainer as to why this dude is a master at fighting. Because he would be a direct descendant from Hinawa and Maki, with Hinawa having more of an authoritarian role in the 8th and Maki being a brute with close combat abilities. It only begins to make a lot more sense. After all, he does take the role of a teacher in Soul Eater. And when you compare that to Hinawa, that is very similar to what he does in Fire Force. And then you take into account how angry Hinawa gets at times and compare that to Stein, you can really see the connection. Now I know there are a lot of fans of Arthur out there. After all, he has some of the best moments in Fire Force, if you ask me. Now with a character that's as badass as Arthur, and when you take a look at Arthur's weapon, Excalibur, which is also in Soul Eater, it only makes you question, who is the descendant of Arthur? And with that, it's really quite simple. Who else could use Excalibur outside of a descendant of Arthur himself? And that would be none other than Hero from Soul Eater. DWMA's worst Meister ever. Kinda ironic when you take into consideration that his father is technically the first Meister, but I digress. Not only does Hero look like Arthur, but when you want to take into account the demands that Excalibur would want out of his Meister and how Arthur would most likely have to maintain them, and then compare that to how Hero is actually able to maintain them, that would honestly say a lot about the connection that these two would share. Not only do they both have extremely strong wills, hence Sid commending Hero for his strong will when he was considering bumping Hero up to a 3-star Meister, and obviously Arthur flexing his will throughout the entirety of the Fire Force manga. You know, considering his will is so strong it literally defies logic. I don't think it's a coincidence that Hero is probably the only Meister who could follow all 1000 rules that Excalibur lays out in front of his partner. And then you add the fact that Arthur's probably the only other Meister that would ever deal with Excalibur because he was the original owner. It would make it seem like that this connection was a no-brainer. Also guys, do keep in mind that I am just theorizing in this video because there's no concrete evidence for most of these connections. And next on this list we have Blackstar. Who could he possibly be the direct descendant of? And 9 times out of 10, I definitely say that he's a descendant of Reika. When Blackstar is choosing the path of the demon, or is most likely lost to madness, he begins to get these stars in his eyes, which is very reminiscent to his father, White Star, who is a member of the Star Clan. And then when you take this and add Reika into the equation, who naturally has an affinity for stars, you should notice that there's a connection there. Now, if you really want to get big brained with this, let me reiterate this. When Blackstar gets lost to madness, he starts to have stars in his eyes. In Fire Force, they're all worshipping madness. If you've read the manga, you do eventually find this out. And the fact that Reika has these stars in his eyes and was a follower of the Evangelist, Keep in mind, he just wasn't any ordinary follower. That should say a lot about the two of them. At the end of Fire Force, Reika decides to go and journey around the world because he wants to travel down the road of valor, and it is most likely during this time he developed the Star Clan. And next up, we have Maca. Now, who exactly would Maca be a direct descendant of? And who would her mom also be a direct descendant of? If I honestly had to guess, if we look at Tamaki, Maca does look a lot like her. And when we look at who Tamaki ends up with at the end of the series, Juggernaut, it seems like the both of them might have started Maka's lineage. How does brown and black hair make blonde? I honestly couldn't tell you, but who knows, there might be an ancestor that just had blonde hair, and then that gave Maka's mom her natural hair color. Or who knows, Maka's mom's hair might actually be brown just like Juggernaut's. It's just that we can't tell because of the manga and no one's ever actually colored Maka's mom's hair. Because when you look at Juggernaut's hair and Maka's mom's hair, you could honestly think that they're the same hair color because the manga is in fucking black and white. And then when you take into consideration that Maka is a dirty blonde, it doesn't really seem too far-fetched. I can't really think of anyone that Maka would have a connection with outside of Tamaki. And the fact that we see this ship literally build up throughout the manga, and then you see where that ship sails with the ending of the manga, I feel like that might actually take some part in all of this as well. I personally don't think that Okubo would force feed us this ship for no reason. And just in case if it's not Maka, I can actually see it being Tsugumi as well. If you want my personal opinion, I personally think that Tsugumi is a little more fitting. Next on this list is one of the Gorgon sisters herself, Medusa. I kind of think this one is very obvious because Inca is not only the first witch ever in Fire Force, but because she also shares the same hoodie as Medusa. It's pretty crazy when you think about it because Inca basically created the race of witches while Shinra made the race of Shinigamis. And I am very well aware that it seems like Arrow from Fire Force might actually have a connection with Medusa. After all, Vector Arrow is actually one of the spells that Medusa uses. So obviously there might be a connection there, but I don't know if she's actually a descendant of Arrow, because when you do look at Medusa, she actually looks a lot more like Iris than she does either Inca or Arrow. We all know that obviously Inca was the first witch, so it's a no-brainer that she's related to Inca. But later on down the family tree, is it possible that one of Iris's ancestors crossed paths with a witch, and then this is what led to the birth of the Gorgon Sisters? The funny thing is, none of the Gorgon Sisters look alike, so it's really hard to determine if there's even a connection there to begin with, outside of the connection we got with Inca. For all we know, the Gorgon Sisters might not even actually be related. They might just call or refer to each other as sisters because of a pact, or they might be related. I don't know for certain because this was never actually answered in the manga. But when Medusa does take over Arachne's body, she does say there's nothing like a sister's body. I kind of feel like they just call each other sister, but to be safe, I'm just gonna say it right now. None of this applies if it turns out all the Gorgon sisters are actually related. I think Medusa might be a descendant of both Iris and Inca. And here's some of my ultra headcanon. I think there might be a possibility that one of Arrow's descendants might have been like a top dog witch and made the technique Vector Arrow. And that's probably where Medusa would have got that technique from. You know, there's not really much to go off of, but that's all I could really think of. I think it's cool to put something on the table rather than not have anything on the table at all. So take that headcanon as you will. And keep in mind that would only apply if they're not actually all related. Now when it comes to Ogun, I wonder who he could actually be the ancestor of. I think most people would say that his ancestor would be Kilik, but I don't really want to rule out the possibility of his ancestor being Nagas. But when you look at the similarities between Kilik and Ogun and how they both abbreviate their special moves, Triple F or the FFD. There are actually a lot of similarities between the two, and I definitely think this makes him lean a lot more towards Keelik than it would Naiga's. Next on the list we have Maka's dad, Spirit. I think this one is practically easy because there's nobody else in Fire Force that has red hair outside of Liza or Vulcan. So I think Spirit would be a descendant between Vulcan and Liza. And last but not least, who would Seoul's ancestor be? And I think the answer to that would be very simple. I think Seoul's ancestor would most likely be Sho. Not only because of his iconic sharp teeth, and Sho, Shinra, and their mother all sharing those same exact sharp teeth, but when we look at Shinra, whenever he uses his 3rd gen pyrokinetic abilities, he's usually making sides. So I really think that there's a connection right there. But not only this, Sho and Seoul both have white hair. And when you look at Sho and Nataku at the ending of Soul Eater, it seems that they're both enjoying music. And I can see this being a start in Sho's interest for music and it carrying down further along the family tree all the way to the Evans. Now, if you guys would like for me to do a part 2 of this video, please let me know down in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next Fire Force video.